we're getting curious, we're asking interested questions, we're just not getting anything from the other side. I think it's one of those disruptive moments where we look at the other person. It's like, are you distracted? I'm not getting a lot from you tonight. I'd love to share with you and take advantage of this opportunity. If now's not a good time, maybe we can push this off to another date, or like maybe we can start over. But sometimes just using a little bit of disruptive language, changing the dynamic, leaning into a little bit of that vulnerability and honesty.
This is episode number 640 with Christopher Peck. We are going to be talking about using what he calls active communication in dating and relationships. Christopher is a communications expert. He's written a book about how to succeed in communication skills, and this is such an important topic. I can't wait for you to hear what he has to share. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Wiener. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I've written 3 books. My 3rd book was published in September of 2024. It's called Love at Last, and it's true stories of falling in love later in life. These are inspirational stories, especially if you've given up hope. You need to read these stories to get hope back. And so you can find all 3 of my books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. Before I bring Christopher on, I want to invite you to join my Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. If you're not yet a member, you've got to go over there. If you're a woman over 40 and you want a positive place of support, head on over to Your Last First Date. And now for my guest, Christopher Peck. He has trained thousands of actors, storytellers, business professionals, and public speakers to bridge intention and impact using theater tools and techniques. He has over 25 years of experience in acting, writing, and directing, and he focuses on communication as the key to influence and success. Christopher lives in Denver, Colorado with his wife, son, and his rescue dog, Presley. Welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you here.
Oh, me too, Sandy. Thank you so much for having me.
You've just written this new book, and you call it Active Communication, ACT in big letters. So tell us the inspiration behind it and what active communication is.
Thanks for asking. No, the ACT is really a nod to my performance and theater background. I'm a professional stage director by trade. I was an actor for many years. And one of the inspirations for this book is being around theater performers who I feel are some of the best at performing, at communicating, at storytelling, learning from those performers, teaching those performers. And then when I started this consultancy back in 2016, how can I take that theater influence that has been so important in my life and start applying it to not just business leaders, but also individuals in their personal life? And so that's really the impetus for this book. Is I wanted to pull from the theatrical community. Of course, I pulled a little bit from other communication coaches and voices in that communication sphere. But that's really what I wanted to try to accomplish, is how can we use theater to influence the way that we show up and perform our communication, which I think leads into your second question, this idea, what is active communication? I view communication as an action. It's something that we do. It's something that's observable by our audience. And that often elusive space between the intention behind our communication and its ultimate impact on an audience is oftentimes a problem of the way we show up and perform that communication. So what are the decisions that we're making, the observable choices that we're making that are influencing the way that we show up and share and communicate with our audiences?
And audience, you can mean one-on-one as well as audience, big audiences, right?
Absolutely. Big, little. I like to use that word audience, again, just because it is sort of influenced by that theatrical background. But an audience can be this conversation that you and I are having. An audience can be the wider population of individuals who are listening to this podcast. So audience really is, who's the individual that we're showing up for? Who are we communicating with? And what are the active and actionable choices that we're creating in order to have an intentional impact on those audiences?
Yeah, and communication is such a struggle for so many people. I mean, this comes up all the time. One of the things that I see as the problem, and I'd love to hear from you what you see as some of the core issues, especially
Mhm.
when people are out there dating, is
Mm,
that we communicate in the way that we process. We communicate in the way that we like to be communicated with. We
mhm.
don't always tune into the other person because we don't know how, and we don't know how it's going to land. And
Yeah.
I find that this is one of the core areas that I see. I'd love to hear from you what it is that you see.
Yeah. So even to take that a step further, we certainly show up and behave and communicate in a way that resonates with us, right? Sort of modeling and expecting that behavior we'd like in return. And oftentimes, I think as communicators, what we're actually doing is showing up and communicating the way that others have mentored and shown up and communicated to us at formidable points in our lives. So, whether it's mentors, coaches, teachers, parents, but those individuals who have modeled communication for us, and then we've taken that model and utilized it in order to navigate our own lives, right? So the individual who really struggles to show interest in their audience or the person who's in front of them, there's that question of like, well, who showed interest in you? Like, what did that look like? Were you able to come home and process your day in an environment where you felt like your voice is heard? Or did you come home and immediately have to go to your room and sort of like a scene and not be heard? Like what was that environment and what were the factors that weighed into the way that you had to show up and perform and communicate in those environments?
It's so crucial. And so many
Mhm.
of us grew up in homes where our parents just had no clue. They had no
Mhm.
clue how to communicate with us. A lot of homes were either, like you said, people who either supported you, but most of the time it was yelling or absolutely no connection, and you
Yeah.
had to figure it out on your own. I mean, I had the yelling and the figure it out on my own. And so, how did you grow up, Christopher?
So I grew up in an environment. I grew up in a very religious household. Like it was a loving family. Like I still have a strong relationship with my family, and like there wasn't a lot of emotional vulnerability, particularly around negative emotions. Like there was plenty of space for positivity and enthusiasm and telling jokes and witty banter, but there wasn't a lot of space to process and share negative emotions. Like I wouldn't say it was an environment where I learned healthy ways to share my own anger, which, as I've grown up and matured has manifested in some real challenges around like how I do process my anger and and what those environments look like and how I show up and do those things. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges that I continue to work with. I also grew up in an environment where it was just sort of better to go with the flow than to push back. I have a pretty strong people pleaser mentality, which I'm still trying to process and work through and show up more intentionally. Um, yeah, and a lot of that I think does sort of stem back to an environment where it's okay to be happy. It's less okay to be sad. It's not okay to be angry, until you are angry and that anger erupts into something more malicious. But yeah, I would say that was mostly my experience.
I can relate to a lot of that. I think that most people struggle with anything other than happy. And you're okay. And even the way people ask questions like, how you doing? Okay. So there are people who want to hear that you're really okay. And then there are
Yeah,
people who just want everything to be okay.
I agree. Yeah, I love that disruptive personality. I find myself, I've spent a lot of time working like in the beverage industry and retail, and every once in a while you get that disruptive personality that comes in. You're like, hey, how you doing today? And they look at you and they go, today sucks. And it's one of these great moments where you're really brought into the present, where it's like, oh, well, I wasn't anticipating you responding that way. And now you have a choice. You want to dodge this conflict? Do you want to, tell me more? Like now what do we do? And it's these really charming moments of humanity, and I think it's a lot of what Brené Brown talks about, and vulnerability, and like being able to share and be deeply honest and genuine with one another. But like these moments where we are able to, ask a question, not, just to get a canned or rehearsed answer, but to like penetrate deeper and to really build like a deeper, better, richer understanding of the person that we're talking to.
I love that. And I also know in dating, we can't overshare because that's also a problem. So there are
Yeah, yeah,
techniques. And so let's start with some of the communication techniques that you share
yeah.
in the book.
I don't know. What's your favorite? Where do you want to start?
Something that comes up a lot in the dating world is that people don't ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're trying to start a conversation, especially in online dating with somebody. And like the other day, I connected with somebody at a lovely profile. He matched with me. So, okay, we're
Mm-hmm.
both matching. We both made the action to match, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean anything, though. So I asked him a fun question, and his response was, I live on Long Island. It had nothing to do with my question at all. It was like, do anything fun this weekend? I live on Long Island. So I unmatched him because he's not worth an effort to go and he did like,
Yeah,
what? But
yeah.
let's say you're talking to somebody, they answer your questions, they never ask you
Mm-hmm.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say it doesn't necessarily mean they're not curious. It just might mean that they have no idea what to say. So,
Yeah.
is there something people could do to get the conversation to start moving in a more back and forth way?
The first thing I like are open-ended questions that create space for both sides to find a connection with one another. So you asked a question, right? Like, how was your weekend? I'm from Long Island. So if I were in an environment where this is a first date and I'm not like, and I don't have the power to just immediately like unfriend this opportunity, right? I might look for an open-ended question that allows him to open up a little bit more about like why Long Island? Like what was your experience there? I've got some friends like that, it's and try to find those connective pieces through open-ended inquiry. I think from that person's perspective, there probably is a lack of curiosity that exists, or there's just an anxiety, and the anxiety just sort of pushes you in. Well, I'm just going to answer the way that I know how, as opposed to showing up and being vulnerable, or even answering the question that was asked of me. But what are those open-ended questions that can allow two people to start moving toward one another in the conversation? Where questions, what questions, why questions can sometimes be perceived or observed as a little aggressive, but how questions, what was it like growing up in Long Island? How long have you been there? Have you lived there your whole life? What are some of your favorite experiences there? Do you get out to this side? Do you get out to the other boroughs often? What are the ways that you can start moving them towards you through your own curiosity and interest? In the meantime, sort of like seeing if they're ever going to start opening up in a way that is going to allow you to get from date one to date two.
Yeah, open-ended questions are the best. And
Yes.
I think so many people do not ask open-ended questions. They ask yes or no questions. They ask one-word answer questions. You can tell fairly quickly if somebody has any curiosity at all. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, we all get nervous on first dates. It can be awkward. What we do often is we feel responsible to both carry the whole conversation or to please somebody else. And so for the people pleasers out there who think they have to carry the whole conversation or just answer the nice answers, any advice for those people?
I think sometimes in those first dates, we just need to go ahead and establish some of those boundaries. Is if we find ourselves in a situation where we're getting curious, we're asking interested questions, we're just not getting anything from the other side, I think it's one of those disruptive moments. where we look at the other person, it's like, I'm not, are you distracted? I'm not getting a lot from you tonight. I'd love to share with you and take advantage of this opportunity. If now's not a good time, like maybe we can push this off to another date, or like maybe we can start over. But sometimes just using a little bit of disruptive language, like changing the dynamic, leaning into a little bit of that vulnerability and honesty. Sandy, I'd love to just be getting a little bit more from you right now. You seem distracted. It's getting a lot of one word answers. Not to put you on the spot, but like, I'm here to learn more about you. And I'd love, is there a favorite question that you love to be asked that could maybe get this conversation moving in a direction where the two of us can really take this time as it's intended to get to know each other better and see what kind of spark or connection the two of us have. And so I think, establishing those boundaries, stating like, this is why I'm here and this is what I want. And, and then not be, you are going to be afraid, but being comfortable, getting uncomfortable, doing the disruptive thing is often the only option that we have in those situations if we want to try and make any headway in the conversation as it is.
I love the term disruptive. I just, I think I'm a disruptor. So
Yeah.
I like when people push back. I like when people have like a little bit of an edge
Mm-hmm.
because so many people say nothing. So many people walk away from these dates and they're like, oh my God, another terrible date, but they've never disrupted. They've
Yeah.
never said anything. So this is really great. And I think, noticing when someone's distracted. Like I went on a date where the guy had his phone out and I didn't have the courage to say, please put your phone away. This doesn't look like it's an important conversation and we're here to get to know each other.
Yeah.
And it happened once where he had his phone out and it was for a legitimate reason. The
Mm-hmm.
second time it happened, it was not legitimate. I realized he's addicted to his phone and there were
Yeah.
other things. And I was just like, I don't even have the energy to deal with this. But,
Yeah.
I think that if we could have those conversations, I regret not having those conversations sometimes. It takes courage, it takes vulnerability.
To your point, when we can speak the thing into existence, right? As opposed to, I think oftentimes, and again, it sounds like both of us relate to this people pleaser, where the thing that we want to say isn't said, and it just builds and it builds and it builds and it has to come out somewhere. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. I think it draws back to this, like, what if we were able to do that? And I hope our listeners are hearing that, like, you're an expert in your field. I'm an expert in my field. And both of us, like, are admitting to challenges around, being vulnerable, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, disrupting. Like, what if we were in those first and second dates able to say, this, I'm feeling like this conversation isn't important to you. And I'd like to hear you speak a little bit more on that because you're checking your phone, your body language, your eyes are darting around. It looks like you keep looking at the camera, or not the camera, sorry, the clock, and so, it just feels to me like this conversation isn't as important to you as I wish it was. And just being able to, again, speak that into existence. The other person might have a negative shame response. They might get indignant. Like, it might turn into a conflict conversation. And what an amazing opportunity. This is a first date. You never have to see this person again.
Right.
Like, is there a better, I mean, this isn't like a colleague at work that you have to see the next day. What better opportunity to rehearse and practice what you're looking for in a relationship, and to practice your own, you know, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and establishing your boundaries and disrupting conversations when it feels like it's not going in a productive or constructive way. Like, you never have to see this person again.
And you learn how they deal with any kind of objection or
Yep.
hard conversations. you see their defensiveness, or you see them maybe get defensive, but then maybe take a step back and
Yeah.
process. And so I think you learn so much so quickly if you're
Mhm.
willing to go a little deeper in those areas. And I agree with you. I think that you have nothing to lose and everything to gain if you use language in the right way, though, because, a lot of people are just like, why are you checking your phone?
Yeah.
That's not a connective conversation. The way you said it was
Right.
beautiful. It was just like, I'm feeling this, not you're an idiot. Um, right? Which
Well,
is
and
what the
of course, the big
conclusion.
difference being I language versus you language.
Exactly.
You language, which is so combative. But when you take ownership of the moment and your feelings, I'm not attacking you. I'm telling you, I feel this is happening, which gives you ample space to say, I'm waiting on an important phone call. I'm sorry, I am a little distracted right now. Like it gives you the opportunity and the space to fill in the blanks that I'm not understanding or experiencing without, you're doing this and you're doing that. And the accusatory that comes from that, I think negative and deconstructive you language that we do so often like fall victim to.
Yeah, that's an important distinction that we all could use for every bit of conversation we have with everyone. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. This episode is brought to you by Studio Headphones and Earbuds. This Swedish company brings you high-quality headphones at great prices. I have the E3 wireless earbuds with 30 hours of playtime and noise cancellation. They are perfect for everything from my daily walks to recording my podcast. Go to studio.com, that's SUDIO, and enter code LASTFIRSTDATE15 for 15% off your purchase today. For first dates, people often don't know how to prepare themselves emotionally, mentally to show up and be their most authentic, be their best, but also be honest, like we're talking about. Do you have any tips for people to prepare themselves? I mean, I feel like this is a theater tip.
Oh my gosh. I love that you asked this question. So I'm going to answer the question with a question. Sandy, what was the last thing that you did before you and I got together and started recording this podcast?
I review my notes and I recorded the intro so that I would be prepared to get right into it when we got on the call.
Yeah, yeah. So in theater, we call that the moment before, right? So the moment before is the imaginative homework that, or in the case of an actor, it's imaginative homework that the actor does, considering what is the last thing that happened to me before I step on stage, right? Because this imaginative homework really unlocks a lot. If the last thing that happened to me before I walk on stage is a surprise birthday party versus being in a car accident, I'm going to show up on stage differently, or at least my character should be showing up on stage differently. That those actions that preceded that present moment dictate or motivate the way that I show up in that scene. And it's the exact same thing in our lives is we can't always control everything that happens to us. But I find that more often than not, and I would even say most often, we can absolutely control the last few moments that we take before walking into that first date. And so what are the rituals or strategies or tasks that you can take on before walking into that first date that place you in that position where you do get to show up as what I like to call your favorite version of self? Like, how do you want to show up? how do you want to be intentionally seen, felt, heard, and experienced by your audience, in this case, that other person? And what does that mean for those 5 minutes before? Before coming to this podcast, I was rushing from another event. And so I literally had between 5 and 10 minutes to kind of put myself in a position to review my own notes, to think about what my talking points were, and how I thought maybe this conversation was going to navigate and go. I didn't have a ton of time, but I had just enough to put myself in a headspace where I can show up intentionally and create the impact for my audience that I'm hoping for. And so I love what that moment before is. Is it meditation? Is it pump up music? Is it affirmations? Or, if you're spiritual, is it some kind of reading that helps ground you? Is it going for a run? I wouldn't recommend going for a run right before the date, maybe, but like, is that something that you want to get in so that when you show up, you like you've created a feeling for yourself that puts you in the best possible position for whatever success looks like for you on that first date.
Yeah, I think it's so important because often people come like you from another event, maybe
Mm-hmm.
work,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you've had a really bad day. And then if you don't do these things, you bring all of that with you
Mm-hmm.
and you lay it on somebody who doesn't even know you
Yeah.
and says,
Yeah.
wait, what? I don't want any of that stuff from your horrible day. And so I think, the music, I love all the suggestions. I think for people who come from work to change out of their clothes is helpful too.
Mm-hmm.
To just take that time. I used to have a first date dress that I could dress up or
Yeah.
down. I had everything kind of ready because I didn't want to stress about what to wear. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to stress about what I looked like or how I felt externally, but internally we need to work on our how we show up.
Yeah. Well, and I
So
love I love what you just articulated. You have a first date costume,
mhm.
right? Something that when you put it on makes you feel a specific way, like you look good. You know exactly what that costume is. You don't like there's not all these moving pieces that you have to think or be concerned about. It's just this is a piece of my wardrobe that has a very specific function and it puts me in a position where I feel good about myself and I feel good about this thing, which may bring anxiety, which may bring stress. And so just like giving yourself as many winning combinations immediately preceding that first date as you possibly can.
Yeah. I also used to do some body language things. We
Mm-hmm.
could talk about that too, because I knew that if I walked into the room with my shoulders back, if I sat at the date with my body open,
Mm-hmm.
it would be much more effective than if I was sitting there with my arms crossed and, you know,
Right.
and walking or showing up late to the date and apologize. I mean, there's just so many things that we can do so we are not showing up at our worst, but we show up at the
Mm-hmm.
highest version of ourselves.
Yeah.
But many people are not really clear what those nonverbal cues might look like. So can you share some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned one of them, which is just open body language. I think as audiences, we are looking sometimes for like that disingenuous behavior. Can I trust this person? Is this person going to give me the runaround? Especially in a dating environment, if you've been dating for a long time and really struggling to find someone who resonates with you, you may have you may be looking for it at that point. Like, where are the red flags? And so coming into that conversation with open body language, facing our other, we're not closing ourselves off, either our arms or our legs, but we're open, we're accessible, we're creating sort of a shoulder to shoulder connection with our other. Um, that's really important. Making sure that you're maintaining, and I talk about the 50-70 rule in my book, which is that eye contact is most effective 50% of the time when you're speaking and 70% of the time when you're listening, which obviously isn't all the time. And so, where do your eyes go when you're not making eye contact? And what I like to tell individuals is create a triangle for yourself that goes from shoulder to the top of the head and stay in that zone. Because when you're looking in that space, you're not shifting focus away. You know, if I keep looking up at the clock, eventually you're going to keep looking at the clock too. And if you're looking that direction, then that means you're not looking at me, which means we're creating disconnection.
Hmm.
Um,
I
you
like
know,
that.
yeah, so eye contact, keeping that gaze with your imaginary triangle. I'm looking at my notes right now.
I just want
That's
to mention something I heard the other day,
yeah.
which is it was a body language expert. She's written a book about body language that was very popular a number of years back.
Mhm.
And she was talking about when we make eye contact, a lot of the time we're looking away while we're thinking, we're looking up, we're
Mhm.
looking to the side. She said the most important thing is to make eye contact at the end of that sentence, at the end of
Mm.
that conversation, because that's what people hear. That's what lands with
Mhm.
people. And I thought that was a really interesting thing because a lot of people try to just keep staring right at you the whole
Yeah,
time. That can
yeah,
feel also creepy,
yeah.
if you're never looking away. Yeah. So what do you think about that? Just to kind of land it at the end.
No, I think that's great. I don't know if it's anything I've ever actively thought about before, but as I'm thinking about it, it's something I do instinctively. Um,
Mm,
but I do want to talk about the reciprocal of that, right? So if we were to begin with eye contact and then slowly start trailing off, again, we're moving that visual focus away from ourselves and onto something else. And so to this individual's point, even if you're dancing around, right, that 50% that you're not making eye contact while you're speaking, landing on that final moment, it's the same thing as punctuating the end of a sentence, which is often where the most valuable piece of the information is. And so landing on the end of that, making sure that you are connecting with your audience or this individual right at the finalized moment. I think that's a really bold and great suggestion. The other thing that
mm.
I want to speak to is you talked about, you know, making sure your shoulders aren't back or shoulders aren't forward, that you've got good body language. So really simple fix for this. So if you're if you're standing, imagine that there is an imaginary fishing line that's going from the top of your head to the ceiling, just pulling you up to your fullest height. And that creates a neutral, standing up straight position. And then the thing that I like to tell people is just elevate your eyes. You know, our whole body rolls forward when we look at the ground. And most of us spend a lot of time looking at the ground, myself included. When you elevate your eyes, your shoulders come back, your head comes up, your whole body language changes. I like to tell people it's the difference between Superman and Clark Kent. Superman, who's 6'2" with his chest puffed out, and then Clark Kent, who spends so much time looking at the ground, he hunches over, he's 5'11, his entire body language changes, which is how he's able to hide in plain sight, is those two silhouettes are so remarkably different. And so just that simple elevating your eyes, remembering that fishing line that's pulling you up to your fullest height, and just being intentional about that body language really does make a significant difference in the way you're perceived in terms of confidence, in terms of engagement, in terms of just wanting to be there. So, yeah, really simple choices that you can make. And then, of course, the big one, right? Smile is making sure that we're smiling, and not smiling because some jerk on the side of the road told you that you need to smile more, but smiling because it's engaging and it's friendly and it's connective. And I have been accused of resting mad face before. And so one of the things that I work on is I just sort of have like a silent joke or a little joyful secret that I keep. Just something that sort of like tickles my fancy so that when I feel my facial body language kind of going in a direction that I don't want it to, I tell myself that little joke or remind myself of that joyful secret, and it just brightens us up slightly, it's perceivable. It's something that's observable by our audience.
That's great. I love the resting mad face. It's the
Well,
cure to resting mad face. I had a
yes.
client many years ago who said she just always looks mad. And
Yeah.
And people would be offended. They would be put off by her when she was trying to date. And she's beautiful, like just really beautiful, but some people also look snobby or like they don't really want anything to do with you. And that's the farthest thing from the truth. And so get feedback from people, find out what
Yeah.
people think. Because again, we don't know what we don't know. We can't see ourselves. And so really important. I love all these nonverbal tips, and they're easy to do. It's just to remember. So, taking the time to get yourself into the right headspace, making sure your body language is matching how you want to be perceived and what you feel like.
Yeah.
Any other tips before we end today? I know there's a lot to talk about, but
Sure,
anything
sure.
I haven't asked you that you would like to share?
To your point, we've talked about this, in terms of like one of the fun things about going on first dates is the ability to practice, and
Mm-hmm.
using that environment, using that time to work on ourselves as much as we're, assessing the other person and seeing that there's a connection or a match there. And that's something, especially as a theater artist, that I can't promote enough. Finding environments and spaces to rehearse challenging conversations or getting curious and interested with others. So often in communication, the only times that we practice are in real time. And so, who are the individuals in your life? Who are the friends that could give you feedback? Who are the coworkers that you could share that sales pitch that you're working on with? Who are the trusted advisors that you could sit with and be like, hey, this is kind of how I want to show up on a first date. Can you talk to me about that? And articulate the experience that you're having from me, but finding environments to rehearse and practice where the stakes are just a little bit lower. We can work on the scripts, right, that we're using to replace those people pleaser mentalities. We can work on that disruptive language that we desperately want to start bringing into our first dates, but every time we find ourselves at a first date, like we're reverting back to what feels most comfortable and what's easiest for us. And so find environments and places to rehearse. If you're not a curious, if you don't find yourself, or you struggle with curiosity, you struggle with interest, ask one or two more questions than you normally would to the waiter, when you're eating, or the cashier as you're checking out at the end of the day. But find environments where you can rehearse, you can practice, and it's not the real thing.
I love that. Well, that brings me to my final question, which is advice on going on your last first date. I think this is perfect because often we wait until we meet somebody who scares us, who we feel too intimidated by. We don't speak up. There are people who are in relationships for the longest period of time who never, ever have those hard conversations. There's somebody in my Facebook group who said she was mentioning all of these huge red flags, and she said, I think I'll give it a year. Like a year, it's been
Yeah,
6 months and you're miserable and you're afraid to
yeah.
bring up the things that are really hurtful and that you are not happy with.
Mm-hmm.
But so often, when we grow up in these families that don't create these safe environments and we don't have the ability, the language, and that you so eloquently provided us with today, that we just keep quiet because we don't want to get yelled at. We're conflict averse. We don't know how to deal with anger. Like you said, it's good to be happy, but not so good to be angry. And there are other emotions under anger that we have to also unpack. And this is a whole other conversation. But often in coaching, I will help people get from angry to sad, or my values are not being honored. I don't feel respected. There's so many reasons why we have our emotions. They're all valid. We just have to understand them and take chances. Really be brave. I mean, one of my big takeaways from today's podcast conversation, that we need to be braver in our conversations and we need to show up more fully.
Yeah. Yeah. And at any step, obviously you're working with individuals who are, mostly in that dating scene. My wife and I have been together for 12 years. And, there are still places where both of us, are continuing to learn how to communicate in the healthiest and most constructive way possible. There are still times where I find myself being a people pleaser, even though I know that that's an environment where I can speak up. But now it's about deconstructing the scripts and the tapes and the experiences that I've had so that I can show up and communicate with my wife in the way that I want to. And the same for her. So at every step of the relationship process, be it a personal or professional relationship, like continuing to grow and continuing to practice and continuing to hone and refine these communication skills, because we never arrive. As soon as people start adopting all of these techniques that you and I are talking about, there'll be 15 new, nonverbal communication techniques that you need to adopt immediately that you can bring into your dates. And so just continuing to hone and refine so that you can show up as the intentional and favorite version of yourself.
I love it. So Christopher, let our audience know how they can find you.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram at Chris Speaks Up, a shameless plug for my book, Active Communication, How to Command Any Audience in Your Business and Your Life. It's short, it's inexpensive, and it's actionable. So if you're looking for 75 pages, to start 2025, what are ways that I can show up and be a more active communicator? This is the way to go.
We'll put that all in the show notes, and congrats on your new book.
Thank you.
Information is just so valuable, and I really appreciate you sharing with us today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sandy. This has been a lot of fun. I love talking shop.
And we can all use some good communication skill building, no matter how many years. I think I've been doing this for about 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
Communication, emotions, all the emotional intelligence pieces, and you're never done. You are never done, and the old stuff keeps coming back, and it will come back, but you have tools. And yeah. Christopher is sharing some great tools in his book, so reach out, get the book, reach out to him for more support, and thanks again for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy.
And thanks everybody for listening. As always, we love when you rate and review the show, especially if you give us a high rating. We love you even more. and if you share the show with friends, follow the show, subscribe. We're everywhere you can find podcasts. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.